game that everyone back in 2004 was raving about. A game that continues to pump its blood back into the ever-breathing body of life of gaming through countless re-releases. The game that brought the name Resident Evil back to life and was from then on put forth into the spotlight to be viewed by all, even by those who weren't fans of the previous entries. Of course, I'm talking about none other than Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 was a game that is oftentimes tossed around with titles such as Game of the Year or Best Resident Evil Yet, and after over a decade of playing this game time and time again, it's easy to see why. What mainly changed was the overall core. Gone are the days of spy viewing camera angles and tank-like controls, and now we have ushered into the era of over-the-shoulder camera, along with controls that are both responsive and smooth as butter. Your character doesn't feel like an awkward sack of rocks anymore, but now actually moves like a real human being, and the new options of running up to an enemy Ganado and performing a melee prompt attack after stunning them adds a nice touch. Jumping, leaping out of windows, having precise control over your aim, everything was new and different, and it wasn't at all going overboard for what it was. In fact, the changes were fresh and exciting, and quite welcoming. What Resident Evil 4 had brought to the table of survival horror was adding in this new layer of excitement like no other, that truly left a mark on the world. Along with the core gameplay values being changed, the ebb and flow of the pace was drastically different as well. Resident Evil had always been about being confined to one specific area or level, and having to backtrack all around the area like a humongous, horrifying, godforsaken playground before being able to advance onward. It was all part of the puzzle and was consistently atmospheric. Resident Evil 4 moves towards a more straightforward approach, as Leon is constantly moving ahead to one place and to the next, progressing by a series of chapters throughout the game. So few are the places you'll revisit. In fact, once you're out of the village, it's pretty much a race onward to victory. Though a new shift to focus on combat and action was the route it wanted to take, Resident Evil 4 still manages to retain a few key elements of the horrific ambiance we once knew, to foggy, paranoia-inducing villages, to dark, stormy castles with traps and monsters lurking about, to an island death trap with the most frightening monsters of the game. Resident Evil 4 is certainly no slouch at all when it comes to its presentation. Combine this with its tight controls and constant thirst for combat, and it's pretty much your classic Resident Evil, except on steroids. Hand in hand with the new pacing and take on survival horror, Leon is also being constantly followed by a mysterious traveling merchant, opening up new doorways of managing items and buying and selling treasures and weaponry, which was never at all a thing before in previous entries. Upgrading guns makes a huge difference in the long run, and buying first aid sprays when needed certainly comes in handy for the tougher hauls. It's arguable to say the least that this isn't exactly Resident Evil of them to implement a shop-and-trade system, as it detracts from the need to search and scour for your resources to survive, which ultimately takes away from the overall survival horror aspect. But, with the new focus on killing enemies in ways we've never done before, complemented by the revamped shoot and aim system along with the melee mechanics, it's hard to say that it was such a bad decision. Not only that, but the increase in resources for the player being made by dropped enemies was also a feature that coincided nicely with this new trend. As for the story, it gets about as Resident Evil as it can. The series has never been too keen on storytelling, but at the time, it was the latest entry and was certainly at its apex of both gameplay and Resident Evil narrative. The tale picks up with one of the series' veterans, Leon Kennedy, who moves on from police force of Raccoon to government agent and is now on a mission to rescue the president's daughter from a European cult. But, to Leon's dismay, the cult is actually a group of psychotic villagers all infected with some kind of zombie-like parasite, turning them into monsters. Of course, there's still mysteries hidden within some of the new and recurring characters, as their ties with the Shadow of Umbrella definitely sparks a few nostalgic and wandering thoughts. That's about as in-depth as it gets, but don't get the wrong idea, as Resident Evil 4 is filled with as much twists and turns as any good Resident Evil game can get. Whether you are a fan of the old and classic, or simply getting into the game because of this particular entry, it's obvious why we all come to an agreement on the greatness that is Resident Evil 4, and why it managed to win Game of the Year. If zombie slaying is your thing and with a little bit of creepiness on the side, then you'll find yourself playing this game over about 1,000 times. If you're still too attached to the classics, give this game a try. You might actually be surprised at how much of a breath of fresh air it is, and how much charm it carries within its balance of the old and new elements.
Thanks. When we get out of here, drinks are on me.